All right, welcome back, everybody. I hope you had a nice break and had some ideas for questions for our roundtable discussion. And I would kindly ask our dear speakers to take a seat in the very front row. Oh yeah, oh, no seating arrangement. Yes, and I think, do you still have your glass, Socrates?
Yeah.
Do you have, because I can, yeah, that's for you, Jennifer, or just here. Yes. And I think that's for you. Just a few. Thank you so much. And yes, I'm sure there are lots of burning questions, whether they be in terms of content or structure as well. So maybe we will begin with the one that was posted in the chat. Would you like to read it out loud?
I read it in the back, you can see it here. So it's for Socrates. What would reformating or return to factory settings look like for the girl online?
So we're basically discussing lobotomy. But do we need to return her to factory settings? I mean, I think Alex covered that before with the answer that she gave. Like, I think there is this this lore about the girl where it's like we sort of like threaten that we're gonna go into factory reset mode, and then we never do. We just get better with all the information and backup that we have. We just update our memory. We don't factory reset. We don't do that. But yeah, that's for me. But I would like also to extend the question to the rest of the girlies here. So yeah.
I don't think I have anything very long to say, but I think there's also this almost consensus, or there's this girl brain list online that is very amazing. And one point is the girl is an amalgamation of everything she's ever experienced. So I think resetting her is really eradicating her. So I think it's a contradiction in itself. And I think it's a nice thing of coming out of a complexity and continuing that and not resetting it.
I feel like you covered it.
Yeah, maybe adding to that, I would just also ask, because Socrates to you, but also, of course, in general, because you were walking us through this process of your personal updates. And I was wondering how that particular language and structure that you used also made you maybe have different feelings about your human identity. So is there like anything that you felt like you were becoming more machinic over the course of like preparing this lecture?
To quote Alex Keisho, I would say more angelic. But it was a fun process because there's like this spectrum of moving between human, machine, everything, God, animal. You moved all around all these structures during the making of this lecture performance. So it was a fun experience to relive that. And you can always go back and add more, but then it would be long. But it was fun. I wouldn't necessarily put a name to it, but it's fun. You should do that. Do it with your friends. Make your history update of updates like performance. Yeah.
Thank you. Is there anybody in the audience who would like to add to that or expand on that? Otherwise, I think another one dropped in the chat.
So for all, Of the panelists, would you rather be a cyborg or a girl?
I can't elaborate yet, but a girl.
A cunt.
I'm obviously a girl already.
You're the girl. The girl. So yeah.
Thank you.
It's not really a question, but maybe could you elaborate a bit more on your research process, like looking back in time and finding these fragments of what happened in your past and looking from today and how this changed maybe the perception, and also like really how maybe also what are you doing with what got lost on the way, like how you can work with this now. Maybe.
Okay. Trying to. I think one part I already said, or that what was really interesting to me is because, I think memory is incredibly selective, and memory is also a lot of lies that we tell ourselves, which is scientifically proven. I'm not just making a joke here. Or we like take stories from other people and we embed them in our own memory and tell them that they're real, because we need a story that we tell ourselves about ourselves. So I think for me it was really interesting to find things that I sort of had forgotten, and also that changing my own narrative that I have about myself. Like the Taurus narrative, where I was like, no, I was just a soccer girly, and it's like, oh no, I was thirsting a soccer girly, which is kind of a different context. But I think it's also this, navigating shame, which is very interesting. I think that the experience of, I also don't fully remember what I said in my lecture now and what I only thought I would say. So if I repeat myself, tell me. But I think there's a shame in being a girl that we're, of course, we all know what it feels like, but also, maybe then not conforming to being a girl is even more shameful, like maybe wanting to be a gender that you're not viewed as. I had this like, oh, okay, was this thirstiness, was it actually real? Like, was I really attracted, or was it easier to, be an internet, or like be an email dealer of hotness and say that I'm really attracted, rather than it being a gender crisis? So I think these things to me are really interesting, sort of the changing of my own narrative. What else was in that question?
Maybe a research process, but
Right.
also maybe what got lost.
Right.
Like,
But like research process for like this particular lecture, or like
general, like
in general. And what got lost? He's so deep. Well, I think research, I'm not research, I'm an artist. I would not say that I'm a researcher, and I'm not a theorist. So my research is selective. I read what I like, and what I don't like, I ignore. And so I also look at, there's also the interesting thing where I recently was at an online seminar by Caspar Wiemann, and he's a theater director. And they have a project that concerns with like de-radicalization online. And what they do is there are a bunch of writers, theater writers and actors, and they wrote different scripts for TikTok profiles based on how people, like how young men who get radicalized into like masculinism, based on the aesthetics of these videos also that people get radicalized from. So they wrote their own scripts within that aesthetic, and try to, give alternatives to this toxic masculinity, or also, fascism and all these fun things. And there you see, like, these people, they use aesthetics that they don't agree with because it serves their purpose. This is not something I do. I really like to use the aesthetics that I actually enjoy. And I think part of my research is also trying to figure out what are aesthetics that are luring you in, that are entertaining, that are fun, that are sexy, that are glossy. And I use these aesthetics sort of as the like surface. Or I think you had this beautiful image in your lecture about the oil, rainbowing on water. I think it's also this, it's like giving an allure, giving a seduction, and then use that as a layer for, talking about things like climate grief. Or like my last video work was more concerned with how do people grieve fictional characters in games, which is also weirdly gendered. I think I research in layers, and research sometimes happens accidentally through just being interested in the world, and then the rest is more particular when I'm actually working on something and trying to figure out more. But I feel like I've yapped a lot, so I'm going to pass the mic to whoever wants to say.
You covered pretty much everything that I wanted to say, because I follow like a very similar, route. But yeah, more on the what is lost part. I tend to mourn a lot the media that I lost, or the profiles and everything. And now I obsess a lot with that. Like, is there a way to find this, or is there a way to archive? And sometimes I'm getting anxious that I need to archive everything right now, which is always like there as an anxiety. But it's good to go back and keep the things that you have in order. And it's that was also good to do this performance, because it helped me a lot with that. But then, I don't know. I think mourning is there. We know how to do that. We know how to be sad about our lost club penguin. So yeah.
Did you want to say something?
Sure.
Or did I just move on?
No, I think we're okay. So when I wrote my first girl essay, I'm not saying it's the original one, but the one called Everyone is a Girl Online, that was on Wired magazine, the joke I always had with my editor was that it was a forced feminization of technology discourse, which I think describes my entire research process. So I've always been interested in kind of emergent and like marginal ways of seeing the world. And I read a lot about it. And also I think it needs to come through in terms of style and how the text actually appears in language. So I also read a lot of like poetry and like so-called like broken ways that we might convey ideas. Because I think a text should do something formally in the same way that it should in the vein of the argument that it's making. And I also use it a lot because I'm a really private person. I could never do what you guys did. As far as I'm concerned, my archive does not exist. It's wiped every year. And so where parts of myself are inlaid in a text, it's usually in an experience of something visual or poetic, and I'll retain the image or sensation of that and use it to inform the writing. But autobiographical elements are kind of like concealed and encrypted. But a fun fact of who I used to be is that I used to write my diaries in code. So maybe this is it's all wrapped up together.
But that's also helpful, like what Alex does, like this figurative language, and find a way to throw it all in a poem, let's say, or in another creative way, because then you pass this whole point of like mourning again and again of all the lost media. It's fine sometimes that we don't have access to that. It's okay. We lived in the moment back then, I guess.
Yeah.
But I think, we briefly actually talked about this in the break, and I think there's also the interest, because I also was like, but I kind of remember some things, or for example, this forum that I talked about where we were writing like collective horse blogging. I was like, I found an email from that page, so I knew the website domain. But if you grew up in a non-English speaking internet, the chances of anything being archived also by like the internetarchive.org are much smaller. So I think that's also just a reality, which I'm sometimes a bit sad about also. Yeah. Also like frantically trying to download all the US TikToks that I've saved.
Yeah, rip to American TikTok. Yeah, I mean, of course, yeah, is there a question already? Yes, please. Then maybe you can just speak real loud because we cannot move the mic across the like imaginary border here.
So my question arose after the first lecture, and then Socrates, we were talking about The Sims, and for me, like the Sims franchise in general has throughout my life been this really central element of my own perceived girlhood. So I was wondering whether any of you have thoughts about the Sims franchise or like simulation games in general and how they help us experience our own girlhood and create like narratives of what girlhood can be to us.
Yeah, it's always there. I think it's also like the first time that I think I've experienced like extensively or more accurately girlhood through The Sims. And I think what I loved about The Sims is the endless possibilities that you have when you start playing the game, like the customizability of that, like it feels endless. So for me, and to also like jump into the first question that was made to Alex, I think that the moments where we don't feel like we need to define the girl, let's say, the Sims are this endless game where you can have like the eternal girl. Everyone is a girl, even like the rocks. So like this customizability effect proves that we don't need to assign again and again like a certain identity to the girl. The girl is there, and The Sims is a very good way of explaining that, I think.
Yeah, I don't think I have much to add. I think it's also this, the girl can be anything. And I actually also now had to think about filters. Like I know there's also a lot of discourse around filters of like how they're harmful and how they're solidifying beauty ideals that can be harmful to people. But I find filters to be incredibly freeing, or also like sort of on my own gender journey. I think having filters and being like, oh yeah, I also look hot with a mustache and all of these things, like felt really reaffirming actually. So I think this experiencing being a multitude through simulation games is incredibly powerful. But I also feel like the question almost answers itself. Like I think you already say what there is inside these simulation games for girls. Do you have something to?
No, it's perfect.
Yeah, like raise your hand if you were big on the Sims modding forums. There is another question here.
Sims, but I have a different question. And it's kind of, should I stand up?
You can
If
sit
like.
down.
It feels weird if I stand up.
Yes.
A question maybe for all of you, but first a thank you to Jennifer for kind of validating the research framework of fandom. For me personally, it's struck a nerve, and it's really nice to hear. And I was wondering about you also showed some examples of the kind of specificity, kind of the intensity of this girl fandom, no? The intensity of girl thirst or girl desire. And it reminded me of a tweet, of one of the thirst tweets that I saw online, which says, maybe you've seen this one, I want Andrew Garfield to smash a laptop on my tits. Very creative and very violent. So I was wondering if you have any thoughts about this kind of intensification of desire, of this like overlap of like of desire and violence that kind of seems to be manifested in certain type of girlhood, which is very interesting for me. Basically, any of you, all of you, would be probably.
It's the gore Alex.
Let me think about that one. My most favorite question of all time. Good pain. I think I think the thing that I always think about is Anne Boyer wrote this thing about, or she wrote this book called The Undying, and she talks about how the idea that pain is not, it's incommunicable is wrong. Pain is like this clearest and strongest form of communication we have. And I think sometimes this intensification of desire via pain is this desire for complete clarity about how you feel about Andrew Garfield. But
it's not even like a neurotic, it's like you want him to take and smash a laptop.
Yeah.
I found so no, it's not telling. Like there's no.
It's like hit me with your car discourse. Everything comes back to crash.
Everything comes back to crash.
Because I think there's something also about violence that it's not necessarily the end. Violence can also be like a complete, like what is more intimate than being digested by something else or letting someone cut you open, literally. Like I think there's all this freaky stuff about that in terms of people expressing it, not necessarily wanting to perform surgery on each other, although I guess some people are into that. But it's more of this kind of the power of that metaphor of being like torn open. There's so many songs about like Slater, tear me open. And like, I think it's just so, it's the seduction of surrender. I wrote this piece called Prey Mode last year that is like really about that, like what it means to actively want to surrender and how that type of surrender is actually it's not an admission of a loss of power, it's a declaration of like complete and like unequivocal desire. So I think that's why people want people to smash their laptops and hit them with their cars. And I also think fandom is really marked by this, or like I quoted Henry Jenkins, and he also wrote a lot about what it means to be a fan and a scholar at the same time, which I think now has been more normalized, but back in his time, that was really a tension field, because sort of being an academic and a scholar was, you know, within the rationale and non-emotional lesson of objectivity towards the subject, and being a fan is being deeply, deeply embedded in what you care about. And I think also the knowledge you have towards something that you're obsessed with is very different, or something you love is different than knowledge you have about something that you do not love. So I think this link is always there. And also Owen G. Parry, that I also quoted, he also said, because he did this piece on the Larry fandom, which is a ship of Harry Styles and Larry Stinlinson of One Direction. So he like re-performed some of these fan fictions, and he said the best critique he got from fans and not from art critics, because the fans, they really know their thing because they care so deeply about it. And I think the other thing, sort of thinking about also girlhood, or I also briefly mentioned like crying selfies and sad girls, is pain being something that makes things incredibly real. Like maybe it's the most intense feeling that we can think of. So, I mean, of course, we also have, in girl culture, we also have self-harm, right? I mean, that was big on Tumblr, very big. And it's this like making something feel real through feeling pain. And I think it's the same that we do when we take a crying selfie. It's like we monumentalize, or we capture this moment that makes something feel real because we feel so much. So I think there's also this girlish desire of like feeling the world and thus existing at all. Yeah.
What I mean, I have like a lot of images in my head. The first is the Pandora's box. We need to know. Pain is a vessel into knowing stuff, and we're nosy. We need to know stuff. Like, so yeah, that's my 2 cents. We need to know what's in the box, and it's pain, and it's fine.
Yes, please.
Yeah, thank you so much for all the contributions. I have a question to all of you. Given the power that the girl has, and also the power of influence that the aesthetic has, and given the fuckedness of the world at the moment in all the different dimensions, like how political should the girl be, or how political is she, and how political should it be according to you, and to what extent can she become like an activist of some kind, or is she just like condemned to just stay a girl and don't like put her opinion too loud out there? Yeah.
I think I'm gonna continue with what I was saying before, and I think that this is like a very it's a question for everyone to answer. For me, the girl is a vessel. It can be many things, and I think it's tricky because we do that a lot. We try to define her. We try to hook her up into a certain aesthetic or a certain like theory or a certain like aspect of what the girl is, but I think she can be that for you, for me, for other people thinking that the girl is political, and she cannot be that for other people. I think we should not tie her into identity. It's like bringing like this higher dimension of the girl into a cage and locking her in. I think she can also be that. Like, that's what I think.
Yeah, I totally agree. Period. But I think in like, okay, sorry, this is going to be like an explanation, but I think that in terms of how I theorize the girl, I make a really important distinction about how she's this kind of like shell, or like if you watch Evangelion, she's like a mecha where you can climb into her and pilot her, and some people just pilot her for like social mobility, like to just be hot and have fun. Other people pilot it for more active means. So in a collaboration I do with Nora Tefesh, like we look at how the girl has been inhabited by like the IDF and US military with this kind of like cute propaganda. But I think that there's also room actually in that sense. And it also demonstrates like what Socrates is saying and what I explored in my lecture today, that we cannot see the girl as equated with identity. She is like an assembly of like, I guess, like persistent forms that we know are really powerful and that can like release equally intense reactions from people and like elicit those reactions. So I think if you are so inclined to be activist, I think that it is just an important tool in one's arsenal. But I also agree with Socrates in that not everyone likes that. So it's like, yeah, I don't know, a girl's a gun, to quote every Tumblr post ever.
Yeah, I think also on the note of like not everyone likes that, I think not everyone likes to use those tools. Not everyone likes to see them. Like I think it's again, the girl is a contradiction to go into what was my deep dive of the winter, and I think I also saw you deep diving, Luigi Mangione, the alleged killer of the CEO of United Healthcare in the US. I mean, there has been a huge, huge response from the girls and from the edits and the memes, but also a lot of research, right? A lot of like, oh, but what did this person do? What is sort of all the trail of evidence and so on. And I think these girl tools, they have on the one hand, maybe made discourse about the healthcare system in America more prominent, and at the same time discredited that discourse for other people. Like I think it works for some, it doesn't work for others, and that's just what it's like to be a girl. But I think it's also what it's like with every form of activism. I feel like when we are activists, we need to be aware that there's no right form of activism, but we usually need like multi-layers. Like we need also maybe more violent activism, more in the background doing care work. Like it's not a unidirectional way of changing the world. I don't think that works. Yeah.
Thank you. Maybe if there is no pressing question, I would have another question, or unless you have another question. I just wanted to, because like thinking about everything that we heard a lot about fandom cultures, right? We heard a lot also about this idea of the chassis, or the word that is really hard to pronounce also for me. And I was wondering, are these like potentials where, and I don't want to fall back into like weird binaries, right? Or like spectrums or whatever, but is that like this idea of connecting to a bigger collective, perhaps, that could be, tapped in forms of aesthetics or in form of like fandom culture or some appearance or behavior, which actually then is kind of mediating with the very individual desires that then come down to, the single girl, so to say. And is that like a kind of framework or structure that could be helpful in rethinking and like updating also the girl online?
Yeah, I love this question because I think I'd like to point to a piece that a friend of mine, Gary Zhang, wrote called Internet of Egregores, because I think that in 2023, when like girl internet was peaking, also this word egregore started circulating again. And I think that there's something really interesting going on there in that people, because I think the big theme today is that the girl holds so many contradictions, like the cyborg, and that how can the girl be accused of being so hyper individualistic and consumerist in that individuated sense, but also be so disappeared into like a collective, almost like swarm behavior, in the sense that like swarms have to have diminished intelligence so everyone can work in concert. I think that's one of the most compelling things. Like, I don't think it makes the arguments around the girl less important. It makes it more, because she actually kind of imperfectly resolves that tension, in that individual desire can be heightened by behaving in the mode of a swarm, which is what we see with fandom, right? There's like codes of fandom that are kind of adhered to and like replicated and enjoyed, but that doesn't diminish the intensity of feeling that that one person who's engaging with it will have. And so I think there's a lot of hope there, actually, to be upheld about it, in that like if there is sometimes a nihilism or negative about how if we disappear into the collective, then we won't feel anything anymore. Like sometimes that's the implication. But I think in so much of how we think about and analyze girl culture, there's a kind of very almost like organic resolution of that, in that it's like there is clear demonstration and clear evidence that this kind of like swarming actually heightens feelings of like love and affection and attachment that everyone's explored today. So I think that's really cute.
No.
Cool.
For me, like what you're asking about phantoms, it's also indicative of finding languages to communicate. I think like what we do with caring, which comes out of pain, it's a language that the girls speak. Phantoms is another language, it's another aspect of that in my perspective. Like we speak through our love for Luigi Mangione. And we communicate, and it's fun to dive deep into that. Not the Swifties, though. Okay.
But I also think that's how you become a fan, is also this. I don't think you become a fan of someone or something because you think, oh, this is like the greatest that ever was, but it's some work of someone that reaches you in a moment where you need something articulated, and this person maybe manages to articulate that, and that is what initially binds you. And then, of course, you start developing the communication that you mentioned, like with others, over that love for that thing. Yeah.
Any more questions? Oh, yeah. Right.
I have a question. Well, first, thank you for the talk, and I'm currently a lot into thread rights and never found them, and it's wild. And I'm just wondering how the girl can work against people instrumentalizing her for certain agendas, specifically as an example for thread work agenda, like some of these concepts behind it, or if the girl can even work against this, or if this kind of is like already inherited. If she's in the internet, then this is being used in a, like the Hungarian sense, also like people going into the machine and just being that. Makes sense.
I think with the example of the trad wives, I always have like this weird conspiracy in my brain that this form of the girl is actually playing a Gone Girl card on us. So that's how I like to envision it.
That's your fan fiction.
Yeah.
First of all, I love that, and one would hope. Second of all, I think, I guess like, again, this is an explanation, but like I think there's something interesting to think about in the girl. I don't think the girl figure has any utility as in the form of resistance. I think its utility for the means that you suggest is subversion, right? So like this metaphor of crawling into the mecha suit and repiloting it in a certain way, that's just another way of talking about subversion, or like making it kind of figurative. And I think that
And there's ways to do that in ways that aren't necessarily how we might have seen subversion done before. I think in the history of like the aesthetics of feminism and how lots of people have tried to kind of reroute understandings of gender norms and how we both embody them and represent them and work in them. If that's your concern with the trad wives, then the girl figure becomes interesting and unique in that sense, in terms of like, is there a new arsenal of tools at hand that can almost like Trojan horse, like what you want to accomplish into like trad wife land? Because the girl is so compelling aesthetically, I think there's a great potential there, perhaps not yet realized, of using her and her forms and her conventions to to get into the organs of whatever and mess around in there, instead of coming in from a social outside, not like a xeno-feminist outside, to clarify. I guess, I hope that answers your question. I could talk about trad wives forever, but let's not right now, maybe later. I don't think there's much to add. I feel like that was perfect.